questions to both of you. Walid, we know that as social media is a wonderful tool for the resistance against Salafism and jihadism, we also know that it's a conveyor of bad ideas, and that there's a proliferation of lone wolves. Do you feel it is important for Facebook and Google and other entities to shut down certain vehicles for these bad actors, or do you feel that we should be using them to monitor them, and that there might be some kind of intelligence benefit for us?
It's a great question, Sarah, and it's a very difficult equation. So, on the one hand, you want to shut down those who are known and conveying active ideas and orientation, like kinetic, operational, meaning a website like ISIS or Al-Qaeda is using this specific social media home to basically gather them in rooms, chat rooms, and of course conduct real-time operations as a result of that. You need to shut down those. Now, you would leave a few to understand the thinking. You could have intelligence about a large number of information. But you said something very important. The virtual world is a replica, is a reflection of the real world. It's even freer, right? There are places you could meet in cyberspace where you cannot really meet here, either because you are not allowed to or because it's too expensive to travel and meet. So there are two battles happening in social media right now. One is the rise of and the expansion of the jihadists. And the jihadists of two natures. You have the Salafi jihadists that I've covered, and then you have the Khomeini's jihadists of Hezbollah and the alliance that the Iranians are leading. And they are very much organized. Better than that, they are better funded. On the other hand, you have Arab, Middle Eastern, civil societies trying to organize, first of all, as minorities, as women, as anti-jihadist forces. Those are on their own. And I will take advantage of this point to say we have failed, we have missed the outreach to these real moderate, Middle Eastern, Arab, anti-jihadist forces, from the Yazidis all the way to the Assyrians, to Egyptian bloggers who rose against the Brotherhood. So, yes, we need to shut down the operational jihadi sites. On the one hand, we have a consensus. Even the United Nations would agree with you on that one. On the other hand, we need to support. We have given so many grants. I'm talking about the United States. We have given so many grants to the wrong people over the past 16, maybe 26 to 27 years. I was shocked when I learned about a little segment of these grants over the past many years, how they will be actually given to NGOs who are posing as NGOs, but in fact are pro-Islamists or jihadists. And those who told us about them, it's not just American experts, but Arab experts are telling us, what are you doing? What are your embassies doing funding these organizations, mostly Brotherhood or Salafi or others? So there is a lot of work to be done in the cyber world.
Okay. And Ambassador Bolton, President Obama was extremely crafty in how he inserted America as just one of 6 nations when he led the negotiations with Iran. What happens if we take the lead? Where will the other nations go?
Right. Well, this is a point that many of the supporters of the Iran deal have argued to say we shouldn't try to get out of the deal because our allies will be upset. In fact, they know as well as we do that there wouldn't be a deal if Obama hadn't insisted on it. And it's a little known fact that in the proliferation world, the French are actually quite close to a sound position, the kind that probably people in this room would advocate. So they'll shed a few tears for the economic deals that French companies might not make, but they'll know, in fact, that it's better. Germany is a little bit more of a problem. I think the Brits will come around. Russia and China maybe not so much. But the fact is that if you lay out a diplomatic game plan before the announcement, if you write a white paper that explains the reasons to get out of the deal, and it's well done, and you have a further diplomatic effort afterward, Our decision to withdraw from the deal creates a new reality.
That's right.
And others are going to have to adopt to that. If you want my version of the game plan, I published it in National Review a couple of weeks ago. Really, it's not rocket science. And the fact is that Obama was crafty, and the Iranians were crafty too, in trying to tie us and the Europeans into an economic network that would make it unattractive to get out of the deal. That shouldn't dissuade us from making the correct decision here, because the nuclear threat is obviously much more important than a few dollars of profit.
First of all, let me just express a sincere, heartfelt gratitude for what you're doing on a day like this. I think Yemen, Endowment for Middle East Truth, are some of the most committed, heartfelt champions for Israel and for Middle East policy. Good taste in guests. Phares, he is the doctor, the PhD of this Muslim Brotherhood ideology, the sort of the root of all of this challenge, and it's something that we ignore to our great peril. And I don't want to embarrass John Bolton, but I think he is probably the brightest national security / foreign policy, for someone with comprehensive knowledge of what's going to take to keep America safe. I supported him for Secretary of State, openly on the news. This man belongs and will someday be in some type of national leadership of this country, because his ability is just unbelievable. With that said, I'll throw two quick questions at each of them. In terms of Iran, a regime change would be a really cool thing to happen. I'd love to see if you have any thoughts on how America might try to precipitate that. And to you, John, Ambassador Bolton, there's a lot of challenges in dealing with North Korea. I agree with every syllable that you spoke and every response that we should have. So I'll just ask one narrow area. Our economy is about 1,000 times the size of theirs. And it seems to me that countries deciding who to trade with would have a pretty clear advantage that it be us instead of them if we made that the equation. We've sanctioned for 50 years. I'm not sure what we can do, but if we sanctioned them absolutely in the Stone Age, including with China, and then of course did all these other things, do you think that we can precipitate the ability to dismantle? Because I think unless we dismantle North Korea's capability, I think we're on a collision course with exactly what you just said a little bit ago.
Congressman, you are known to be one of the leading thinkers when it comes to Iran. And when it comes to Iran, to the people of Iran, we have a long track record in this area. I'll just add a couple of points. When it comes to the people of Iran, it is going to happen, we like it or not, now or later. That's my shorter version. Because the people of Iran is going to liberate itself, it's going to emancipate. It's only about how much we can help them to do it earlier. That's the real equation. So we remember that in 1999, those who can remember, there was a first uprising on Iranian campuses across the nation. It was suppressed. Thousands of Iranian students left Iran, and they are now the nucleus of this opposition in exile. In 2009, the Iranian people, by taking to the streets, 1.5 to 1.8 million people, stayed on the streets of Tehran for about 5 business days. They were shaking off the moral foundations of the regime to such a point that by the 3rd day, children of the commanders of the Pasdaran were asking them if they can join. It was very close. It was called the Twitter revolution because they didn't have radio stations, TV stations. And instead, during those 8 years where there was a void, as the ambassador has mentioned, our administration then reassured the regime that we're not going to meddle in Iranian affairs, though we meddle in Libya, we meddle in Syria, we meddle whatever we want to meddle. As long as the outcome is that the other side would win. But that's a long story. We reassured the regime, and the regime, when they heard us, when they heard the president then, went on a absolutely a rampage of suppression, one of which was the symbolic death of Neda. So we failed them many times, and that was the peak of failing them. So it is my projection that the Iranian people, including those who took to the streets in 2009, and a second generation brewing behind them, those who were 10 years old in 2009. How old are they now? Do your math. There's a second generation. It is going to happen. What is important is when it is going to happen, our Congress and our administration will be ready to meet them halfway. Remember the Syrian revolution in Lebanon. I was one of those who worked on a Security Council resolution. We visited the ambassador at the State Department in 2004, and he was one of the forces that convinced the administration to go to the Security Council and issue Resolution 1559. That was 12 years ago. And I was asked at the White House then by a high-ranking official, I don't want to mention except in my memoirs later, at the time, would you guarantee that if we issue the resolution, the Lebanese will support? And I said, you come halfway, and without any knowledge of what the Lebanese would do, they will come halfway. And they did. 1.2 million people during the Syrian revolution went down to the streets against the Syrian occupation and Hezbollah in Lebanon. So I trust the peoples. So to answer the question to the congressman, the Iranians will rise again. We need to be ready for that.
I agree with everything Waleed just said there. You know, in terms of North Korea, the nuclear problem in North Korea and the nuclear problem in Iran are similar in another respect. The problem in both cases is the regime. And I think over time, the Chinese have begun to realize that North Korea is a pretty ugly piece of baggage to carry around, but they have not enforced the sanctions that the Security Council has called for. There's likely to be a vote later today on the latest resolution. The first U.S. draft would have cut off all Chinese oil shipments to North Korea. And since that's 90% plus of North Korea's oil, that would have been the end of the economy and everything else. That unfortunately, and the threat, because of the threat of Chinese and Russian veto, has been watered down to capping oil exports at current levels. There's a further problem with that. China hasn't published statistics on its exports of oil to North Korea since 2013, so we don't know what we've capped. But other than that, I think the only solution here diplomatically is the reunification of the peninsula. That's the end of the regime option we have there that we don't have in Iran. In Iran, we need a completely new regime, but there's a country to the south that's fully prepared to be reunited with its family and brethren in North Korea. We need to persuade or pressure China to go along with that. I wish we had started down this road a long time ago. And time is growing short because, as we see from the pace of North Korea's missile testing and its nuclear testing, they are very close to having the capability of hitting any target they want in the United States in a very short period of time. And please be assured that the day they can do that, Iran can do it the next day by writing a sufficiently large check. So this question of how to deal with the regimes in North Korea and Iran, I think should have been at the centerpiece a long time ago, but better late than never because time is short. Well, while we should chime in on this as well, I'm glad Trent is here because my answer is very convenient. We need help from Congress to make it clear that we regard the deal as a strategic catastrophe for the United States. And some members of the Senate, Senator Cruz, Senator Cotton, and others have written letters. We have a decision coming up this week on the waiver of the sanctions. It's different than the waiver of the certification, but I think the president's in the right place on this. He just needs to be able to control the government and get them to do what I think he wants them to do. So some friendly persuasion from the Hill, I think, could be very effective. Well, I'll let Waleed go first.
All I know the gentleman. He has been quite a force, Ali, for many years, since 9/11, in raising the issue of where the danger is coming from. And he has a point. It is originating from an ideology. What I said on the podium was that I made progress in my thinking as well. Though what he mentioned was a book. I brought the book with me, my first book, Post 9/11 Future Jihad, where I pounded all this ideology in all of its forms. Wahhabi, Salafi, Jihadi, Takfiri, Tablighi, Ikhwani, all of it is here. But then I realized with time in my research that the ideology alone, when it's sitting on the shelves, very threatening, and you need to push back against it. But the hand that brings this ideology and push it into the real world, and push it on campuses, and push it on networks, that is to me the most dangerous one. Unfortunately, what we've done, not only did not push back against the ideology, we actually gave grants, donations here in America and around the world to the hands which came sometimes with gloves looking like NGOs and looking like academic endowments and so on and so forth. That was my battle for the last 10 years. Now, when it comes to the region, I will answer a little bit, give the ambassador the other parts. I think if you are mentioning that the Arab coalition that was launched in Riyadh, if you're mentioning that coalition, I think the idea is good, but I think the execution is still there to see how it's going to be established. Because though the coalition, the Arab coalition, with the push by the Trump administration, was in line with what a majority of Congress has been trying to do for the last many years, that is to, number one, expose the ideology. The president said it there. Versus the previous president who went to Cairo 8 years earlier, and he actually ignored the ideology, and he was speaking to the Brotherhood. So the difference is large. What we need to do now is to have some unity in Washington, D.C. when it comes to national security. You could fight as long as you want on all the other grounds, which I'm not an expert, but the American public would want you to unify as well. But on national security, we cannot be divided. With all due respect, on the Iran deal that the ambassador has covered, we should not be even voting for it. It should be a unanimous position. I mean, I don't understand how we have even a debate about it. It is a dangerous deal. And what is dangerous about it are not the technicalities. You know that Ukraine and South Africa, early on after the collapse of the Soviet Union, they went after the United Nations, urged them, please come and take away these weapons. So it's the intention of the Iranian regime that concerns me. And the jewel that was said today, to me, I was educated about one thing. When Ambassador Bolton said, the nukes of Iran are being made in North Korea. That's the equation. We have a perfect deal, as some of the Europeans think, that we can inspect here and there, maybe not all of the networks in Iran. But yes, the Iranians are buying missiles. Why would they buy missiles? To send flowers? Missiles are designed to send weapons. Those weapons are being made elsewhere, while Iran has cashed $150 billion, is building the missiles, is buying anti-aircraft missiles from Russia, is buying the best tanks from around the world, and is fooling us at the end of the day. Thank you.
Well, just on the question about the Saudis and Qatar, look, a lot of the oil-producing monarchies, directly or indirectly, with winks and nods, or sometimes much more visibly, have supported terrorist groups in the region and around the world. To me, this is utterly self-defeating, because ultimately the alligators come back and bite. My view is that in this complex relationship, at this point, the United States needs the unity of the GCC countries. They need to accommodate Israel, and we all of us have to face what I believe is the most pressing threat, which is Iran. Because while all the terrorist groups and all the ideologies have a similar foundation, the one in Iran is the best equipped, and that's the one that worries me most. So my view, and I said this to former officials of Qatar and Saudi Arabia as well, is you need to resolve this in the near term. Qatar needs to make some concessions, stop funding the Brotherhood, for example. That'd be a good place to start. I'd like to see Al Jazeera shut down. That may not happen tomorrow. I'll take cutting off funding for the Brotherhood. So we put that piece in our pocket, and then we turn to the Saudis and others and say, now it's your turn to cut off funding, and work it that way. But not to lose sight for the existential threat of the Iranian nuclear weapons. These are complex problems. You can't sort them out as in the order we would like. But I think disunity now in the face of this growing, menacing Iranian presence ultimately harms all the rest of us. That's my view. When China says they're against the North Korean nuclear weapons program because it brings instability to Northeast Asia, what they mean is they're worried Japan's going to get nuclear weapons. That's real instability if you're China. So I think they're aware of that threat. Personally, I would not, however, want to have to carry through on the threat. I really don't want to see anybody else get nuclear weapons, because each additional country that gets it simply inspires others. There's really not that, even when it's friends of ours in the first instance, there's not really too much difference between me, my position, and the nuclear zero crowd. Ultimately, the nuclear zero crowd don't want any countries in the world to have nuclear weapons. I only want one country in the world. Yeah, I'm not sure that the Iranians are actually testing nuclear weapons, although the structure is a matter of pretty clear logic. Iran is a oil-rich country with huge revenues and recently $150 billion of unfrozen assets, thanks to the deal. North Korea is an extraordinarily poor country, which nonetheless has been able to detonate 6 nuclear tests and is developing an ICBM that, by most estimates, already can reach parts of the continental United States. There's a deal to be made there, and having seen what happened when they built a reactor close to Iran in Syria, undertaking uranium enrichment, helping to facilitate the North Korean test, financing them, studying the results, shipping oil and other supplies to North Korea in violation of UN Security Council sanctions, any number of things like that demonstrate to me why the term axis of evil is not just a poetical metaphor, but could be a reality. Now, we don't know, and it is in large part because we don't have much intelligence at all about North Korea on anything. It's been said that there are more underground structures in North Korea. I'm not talking about the basement in your home. I mean underground facilities in North Korea than are in the United States. Because the North Koreans have known for decades that to hide anything from us, it has to be underground. So we just are not confident that we know what's happening in North Korea, let alone much of Iran. And the intelligence community, like the State Department, like the military, for decades has been in silos on these questions. Over here you have the Middle East experts, they worry about Iran. Over here you have the East Asia experts, they worry about North Korea. And you try and think of the connection and they don't speak the same language, literally. And I think that's been a conceptual problem in the US government's ability to deal with the proliferation threat for many years. Well, I'm not necessarily the person to ask that, in part because I'm Lutheran, so I'll leave the Jewish community to others. But I think there's no alternative. There's no easy answer except continued efforts to make it clear what the correct course is, which is why Emmett is so important, not to make a plug for it, but why not? And why the efforts of people like Congressman Franks, who's untiring in his work, is so important. We just have to do that.
I think, you know, that probably the only entertainment that I get in public life is watching all of these asinine liberal ideas totally destroyed by an unruly set of facts in time. And truth is a very powerful ally. Reality always travels on the same road, you know, as time. And so I'm convinced now that we see the failure of Mr. Clinton's deal with North Korea, where he paid the ransom and didn't secure the hostage. The same with the Obama administration's deal with, when I said I meant North Korea, did I not? Did I say North Korea?
Yeah.
And I think that he did the same thing with the missile technology, and of course Iran. Now let me say something to you. It's something that I'm obsessed with. People think I'm blind to my obsession. I'm not. I'm totally wide open, convinced that I have to have a committed obsession with this notion of the Senate rules. Because the only reason that we have the Iran deal is the Senate rules. And the Democrats have already made it clear they're going to change them as soon as they get in power. And we have a moment here where we have unified Republican government. And the question is not whether those rules will change. They already did in Gorsuch's case. The question is, will we allow the American people to see a glimpse of Republican policy before that happens? And I know that all sounds partisan, but the bottom line is some of the great challenges that we face, North Korea, Iran. I think Ambassador Bolton is so right. Iran is the real danger. Whatever challenges or cost there is in preventing Iran from gaining nuclear weapons capability will pale in comparison to dealing with them once they have a fully animated capability. So I think there's only two things we can do. We have to ratchet up our intensity. We have to make our messages good, because in the ultimate sense, all we can do is create and then disseminate a message. And reality kind of bears that out sooner or later. But I hope we get to the truth before the consequences are too great.
Yeah, just to add one thing after what the Congressman has mentioned, in answering your question, there are a lot of things that can and should be done, but one area needs to emerge, which is bottom up. We are in democracy. They need to form the largest coalition in America, by American citizens, by voters from all parties, two parties plus the others, that would be including the Iranian Americans. Iranian Americans are a very important voice on Iran. Jewish Americans are so important for Israel. Irish Americans are important for Ireland. Fortunately, they don't have problems in Ireland. Iranian Americans should be taking the lead. With them, Middle Eastern Americans. We've formed such coalitions before, 2 times in a decade, with Syrian Americans, with Iraqi Americans, with Lebanese Americans, Egyptian Americans, who are basically for democracy in the Middle East and push against that extremism. This coalition will have with it, on its right, the large conservative Christian forces, and to its left, some traditional liberals, supportive of the Iranian deal. It could be done. And Congress is the place, as the ambassador has mentioned, and it was discussed here before. Congress is a very important place because the administration needs Congress between now and 2018. Maybe later it will be the other way around, but that's a path that we need to explore. Thank you.
I'd just like to leave you with these concluding remarks, and that's that Sir Winston Churchill said, Americans always do the right thing after they've exhausted every other possibility. Let's hope that we have exhausted our possibilities and we are on the verge of doing the right thing once again.